Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back to Villanova Tip Time. This is a Villanova men's basketball pregame show. Today is Saturday, December 19th, 2020, Saturday of the weekend before Christmas, and we had an absolutely loaded slate of college basketball, college football, NFL football, and just really a great sports day here in America. And we are back tonight with a Villanova game tipping off at the top of the hour from the Finn as Villanova takes on St. Joseph's in the Holy War in a rescheduled game. Originally, we were supposed to be seeing the Cats play UVA at Madison Square Garden today. Sort of a huge bummer that we didn't get that. I think a second marquee Villanova matchup that we're missing this season after not getting the Villanova-Baylor game many of us hoped to see earlier in the year. However, we're back with the Holy War after losing the game earlier in the month to COVID postponement on the St. Joe's side. St. Joe's was able to fill the spot and take on Villanova tonight at the Finn on campus in Villanova, PA. Excuse me. Before we get into the action and break down the Holy War and what to expect from St. Joe's and Villanova tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on around college basketball, including the loaded slate we saw today. We're going to check in on the Big East and what we're seeing there. We're gonna cover a little bit about what we saw from Nova Butler on Wednesday night, still fresh, only 3 days ago. And then we're going to get into tonight's game. So we've got a lot to cover. We've got about 19 minutes until you're going to find the Cats tipping off on Fox Sports 1 in a late game for all you East Coasters. So enjoy that late night, although it's a Saturday. So hopefully many of you are able to bear it with a cold one in hand. So getting into the slate of college basketball, I think the most exciting matchup of the day was number 1 Gonzaga against number 3 Iowa. Gonzaga has had a heck of a go of it so far this season with several marquee matchups, this not being their first. However, they've also seen, I think, 5 games canceled or postponed due to COVID. So sort of an up and down season already for them. But on the games they have played, it's been all up. And today was no different, handing Iowa a defeat. And honestly, in a game that was not really as close as the final score indicated. Iowa tried to make it a game there in the second half, cutting the lead to, I believe, as few as 8 points there in the final 5 minutes. But other than that, I think Gonzaga got up about 20 earlier in the second half and sort of had that elite command of the game, which was surprising to see because they've had a little bit of a layoff. And Iowa has looked dominant. As those of you who have watched our show before, you've heard me talk about Iowa. And they've, I think, been the most impressive team to me so far out of the gate. But now I think kind of volleying with Gonzaga for that title now with Gonzaga 4-0 with 3 of their wins against really elite opponents. First one being against Kansas, ranked number 6. They then ranked number 6. They beat West Virginia when they were ranked at 11th. Now they've beaten third-ranked Iowa. Their fourth win, don't want to forget that one, was also against a power conference opponent, albeit a lesser one in Auburn. So the Zags look great at 4-0. And I think Iowa, this is a hiccup. This is one of those games that you'd much prefer to lose in December rather than in March, right? So this is a learning moment for their team heading into a loaded Big Ten slate with a lot of really good teams in the Big Ten. You think a loss like this can hopefully serve them well going forward. Elsewhere in college basketball, you saw a late scheduled game between UNC and Kentucky. UNC game was sort of back and forth well into the beginning of the second half. And then you saw UNC start to pull away there with just generally trash play from Kentucky down the stretch. Kentucky's 1-5 for the first time, basically in the last century. I believe it was in like 1921 I saw earlier. It was the last time they were 1-5. They're not that good. They've had a tough schedule, so you got to cut them a little bit of a break. They might be a little bit better than 1-5 might suggest. But they're not good, and forgive me if I dance a little bit on their grave because one of my least favorite college basketball personalities on Twitter is a big Kentucky guy and a Kentucky homer, and they are trash. He is trash, and I was happy to see them go down at the hands of the Tar Heels today. And then finally in our loaded slate today, we saw a top 25 matchup between the University of Wisconsin and Louisville. And this one was not close. UW absolutely dump trucked Louisville, won by almost, I think, close to 40 points in the end. And that's going to be another nice win on the resume for Wisconsin, where really their only blemish so far was that loss in their home state rivalry with Marquette. But Marquette also has beaten Creighton, so it's not necessarily a bad loss. And it's sort of a nice segue into the Big East. Oh, but before I get there, I also have to shout out a game from Thursday, which saw number 5 Kansas edging Texas Tech by number 14 Texas Tech by 1 point. Texas Tech head coach sort of attributes himself as sort of a disciple of the Jay Wright School of Basketball. So you always like to sort of keep an eye on Texas Tech. They obviously made that Final Four run a couple of years ago. I find myself sort of rooting for them as like a Villanova of the Big 12, if you will. Narrowly edged by Kansas in a 1 point loss, 58-57, in what was a really enjoyable game on Thursday. So those are kind of I would say the top tier matchups around college basketball, as you still see a lot of COVID postponements, cancellations. You're seeing about somewhere around between 15 and 20% of games on a nightly basis being canceled or postponed. But the bright side of that is we're still getting more than 80% of our basketball. So can't complain about that, especially with the state of the world right now, as we wait for this COVID vaccine to be distributed nationwide and hopefully see things calm down as we get further into the basketball season. Switching gears over to the Big East, again, a little bit of a lighter schedule in the Big East as we have a couple programs still kind of reeling from COVID postponements. You saw Creighton bounce back from their loss to Marquette earlier in the week, handling St. John's pretty easily on Thursday. And then, like I mentioned earlier, Marquette, after securing their second top 10 victory of the year against Creighton earlier in the week, fell at the hands of Seton Hall at home on Thursday, where that game was basically tied down to the last 20 or 30 seconds. And then Seton Hall hit a big shot and was able to pull away, ultimately winning by 7 points on the road in a really nice victory that has everybody sort of tossing their hands up saying, man, the Big East is going to be a lot of fun this year. You have a lot, I don't know that you necessarily have a ton of great teams. You have Villanova and Creighton. So far beyond that, it just seems like you have a lot of teams that are sort of duking it out for that middle of the pack, the call it slots 3 through 8 in the conference rankings as you think about seeding for an eventual conference tournament. And I think it's going to be a really big, fun year in the Big East. And, knock on wood, hopefully we see Villanova getting tested time and time again and not suffering any of these losses that might be considered sort of bad on the national stage. But it's going to be a fun year. And then finally, I call out Butler. Butler had a loss against Villanova on Wednesday, which is the last time you saw me. And they also lost earlier today against in-state rival Indiana, 68-60. So not a great start for Butler coming off of their COVID pause. So what did we see from Nova Butler? And I want to do my best to time check myself because we have about 13 minutes till tip-off. And if you were watching Wednesday night's episode before the Butler game, I was literally just motor mouthing right up until the moment of tip-off. And I want to try and, more calmly get to some of those later points because we have really a lot to break down between what we saw with the Cats against Butler on Wednesday, what we expect to see tonight against, more of a mid-major caliber opponent, I would call St. Joe's politely. And I would say that, the story for the game against Butler was Nova had a consistent command of that game from basically from wire to wire. They were up, between 7 and 11 points consistently throughout the game. I would say in the second half, earlier in the second half, Butler kind of trimmed the lead pretty closely. But then again, you saw that sort of trading 4 or 5 point runs, and you saw Nova out with that consistent lead. I will say the game was definitely closer than the final score indicated. Final score was 85-66. So Nova ended up sort of inexplicably covering easily in a game that was sort of hovering around that 9-10 point lead mark. But, like we said in the pregame, Nova should expect everybody's best punch night in, night out. Even, Butler coming off a long COVID pause. We don't really know what to make of this team. And they came out with their best punch, and their best punch happened to be Jair Bolden, who looked like he could not miss for the first 15 minutes of the game. But credit to Nova for making the defensive adjustments they needed to make, preventing the ball, slowing the ball movement down a little bit, which was really strong for Butler in the beginning of the game. Slowing that down, inevitably Jair Bolden went a little bit colder, wasn't hitting everything. And Villanova just played a really consistent brand of Coach Jay Wright basketball to ultimately get away with a nice quality home opener win. I think Jeremiah Robinson Earl was the player of the game, put up 18 points, 5 boards, 4 assists. He was 8 of 12 from the field, including 2 of 3 from three-point, which was nice to see. He'd been a little bit colder on the three-point shooting percentage, so it's nice to see him start to get that up a little bit. And it was another one of those games where his shot chart was really pretty. It was all over the court, sort of a mix of lengths from 3 all the way into the layup, obviously as a bigger dude. But a lot of really nice deep twos, a lot of those few of those baseline jumpers. And he really, on nights like that where he's on and he's clicking from all over the floor, he's a problem. He's almost impossible to defend by a big man. And he's going to cause fits for defenses when he's playing like that. I think on the flip side, you don't want to see him fall in love with that like ridiculously deep 2, which I think he took, I want to say 3 times. I want to say he was 1 of 3 on those. Because it's like, hey, man, take a step back and take the 3, or like take a few steps in and give yourself a little bit easier of a time. Don't fall in love with that like 1 foot on the line, deep 2 as a constructive criticism. But otherwise, the guy looks flat impressive. And when you go over to our other elite player or most elite player in Colin Gillespie, we talked a little bit about sort of one of the matchups to watch against Butler being Gillespie against Aaron Thompson, which played out in Gillespie's favor. Gillespie scored 18 points to Thompson's 14. But there were 2 main events that sort of were big factors for Butler and Thompson. One, in him having foul trouble at the end of the first half. And then 2, somewhere between the 5 and 10 minute mark remaining of the second half, going down with injury. And that was just sort of curtains for Butler. From there on out, that was where the Cats were able to just milk the clock, hit their shots, and sort of run away with the game. Jermaine Samuels. So we talked about him a little bit on Wednesday night, and we said he needs everybody's love and prayers because he is not looking too great out there, and he had a really nice bounce-back effort with his season-high 12 points. He also pulled down 6 boards. I believe he's second on the team in rebounding after Jeremiah Robinson-Earl. So it was nice to see him have a much more bounce-back, confident game. And I think, you can look for him to build upon that tonight against St. Joe's, where shout out to vuhoops.com in reading their preview of the game. They call out that this game tends to center on, strong performances from Villanova upperclassmen leading the way, creates an opportunity for Jermaine Samuel to be that guy, build on that performance, and hopefully show up with another good one tonight. Worth noting from Wednesday's game that Justin Moore with 13 points and Caleb Daniel with 8 points had subpar shooting nights from a percentage perspective. Definitely not quote unquote bad games by any stretch of the imagination, but subpar on the overall shooting percentage. Look for those guys to look for their opportunities tonight against more of a subpar opponent in St. Joe's, especially Justin Moore coming off of back-to-back sort of sub-stellar games. You sort of have the feeling that he's due to light it up because he's looked like a really, sort of that elite level player in waiting. And I'm hoping we get to see a little bit more of it tonight. And then if you look at the bench contribution, Eric Dixon had a really strong first half. I actually, in my personal notes, I marked him down as one of our 3 stars of the first half with 5 points and 4 boards. Trailed off, wasn't as much of a factor in the second half. Swider definitely deserves some love. He's averaged close to 10 points off the bench over the last 4 games, had 8 points on Wednesday night. One thing I don't exactly love from him is it seems like he's settling for not the best shot on the floor just so that he can get the shot up more so than the other guys. So I think that's the kind of thing you see iron out over the course of the season through coaching and game film and things like that, but just something I noticed from the last game in particular. And then Brandon Slater's getting some decent minutes. I love his intensity on the defensive side of the ball. He's definitely changed the pace at times throughout the game so far where, maybe Nova's had a rough defensive couple minutes. He's the guy that changes the, really brings the intensity, changes the pace with a big defensive play. I'd love to see that from him. He's having a little trouble creating those offensive opportunities though. So you'd like to see him be able to do a little bit more on that end. And tonight's opponent in St. Joe's is a really good opportunity for him. So with 6 minutes left until tip-off, again, you can find the Cats on Fox Sports 1. So if you're watching me on a different screen, get that loaded up so we don't miss tip-off. But what is the Holy War? Why do we call it the Holy War? So Villanova and St. Joe's have been played this matchup in 1921. It's called the Holy War because both schools are, heavily rooted with their Catholic foundation and running. Villanova, as most of you know, is going to be run by an Augustinian order, whereas St. Joe's, just a few miles up the main line, is run by a Jesuit order. And there's no love lost between these two teams, but I would say it's there was always a really healthy respect, especially in the modern era, between Coach Wright and Phil Martelli on the St. Joe side, who has since retired. So I don't want to say it's never really gotten terribly chippy between the players, but it has definitely gotten chippy between the fans going back over the last decade or two. And for Villanova Nation, it's been a call it a rivalry that's been very lopsided in our favor. So Villanova leads the series 51-25 overall. I saw a quote from the athletic director on the St. Joe side calling it the Army-Navy game of college basketball, which I love, but I don't know, that might be a little bit boosting for the St. Joe side, I would say. St. Joe's has only won this game 4 times in the last 24 years. Villanova's won 11 out of the last 12 and 14 out of the last 16. Villanova fans, when they win this game, they say the Hawk is dead. When St. Joe's wins this game, as few and far between as those are, they say the Hawk will never die. So it's sort of that fun little nearby rivalry with these two schools a few minutes apart. One of my favorite stories is a really close friend of mine growing up. His dad was actually a Villanova student there in 1985 when Villanova beat Georgetown for its first national title. And he always told us the story about the night that Villanova won. He and a sizable mob of celebrating Villanova students marched right down the main line from Villanova to St. Joe's. And I just love that. I love that story. I love that visual. If you've ever, walking, I'm sure it looked a lot different in 1985, but really fun to think about. And any memory that involves a Villanova national championship, sign me right up. So let's get into the game a little bit. So St. Joe's joining us out of the Atlantic 10 conference. I would say just below power conference level, definitely that sort of just outside of the major level. But they've been a really contributing conference on the national stage pretty consistently through this sort of last, call it the modern era, the Jay Wright era of college basketball, the last 15-ish years. Some of the programs you'll recognize on the national stage from this year and last year would be Richmond, St. Louis, Dayton. Last year, St. Joe's didn't fare so well. They were dead last in the A-10. They had a really tough year defensively, which sort of saw them in the basement of the conference. But the outlook for them this year has been a little better. They're returning their top 5 scorers overall. They're adding some talent via freshmen and transfers. So they were definitely projected to have a better year this year in the A-10, although so far, they've not been able to play as much as they would have liked due to a COVID pause in the program, which was the reason for the original postponement cancellation of their game with Villanova a couple weeks ago. They're 0-3 in the games they played, with a close loss to Auburn, a blowout loss against then number 6 Kansas, and then a tight loss Thursday at Drexel. And there's that giving up a lot of points and those defensive woes seems like it's going to be a continued storyline for them, transferring over from last season. A couple guys you want to look out for are going to be Ryan Daly, who you might remember because he scored 32 against Nova last year in a losing effort, also coming off a 30-point game on their in their loss against Drexel the other night. So this guy's going to put up tons of points, even if they're not winning. He's going to put up a lot of points, so you're going to see his name get called a lot. And then another guy that St. Joe's is excited about coming into this year is going to be Taylor Funk, who you can expect to see be matched up with JRE as sort of that stretch forward that can shoot from the 3. They're really excited having him back off injury, feel like he can be a difference maker. So I think those are the 2 guys that you're going to see the most from. And ultimately, the story tonight is going to be, can St. Joe's improve upon the narrative of poor defense and a lot of turnovers? Otherwise, they're going to be dead in the water, and this Villanova point spread of Villanova being favored by 22.5 is probably going to sneak up on them very quickly. So with that widespread and an outmatched opponent, expect to see Coach Wright do a lot of rotating tonight with his 3 bench players, Eric Dixon, Brandon Slater, and Cole Swider. With a poor defensive team and a poor rebounding team in St. Joe's, expect that to create opportunities for guys like Dixon and Slater on the boards, in addition to Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, who's obviously been a beast on the boards. Like I said earlier, look for Justin Moore coming off of quieter games. Look for Caleb Daniels coming off of a poor shooting night to take advantage of this lesser defensive opponent. Of course, we've come to expect elite performances from Colin Gillespie and Jeremiah Robinson-Earl. Tonight's going to be no difference. I think if the Cats can move the ball and hit shots, you're going to see them possibly sniff triple digits tonight, which is going to be amazing. Like I said, the spread is Villanova minus 22, which I really don't like from a spread perspective. You saw a worse St. Joe's team last year lose by 12 in a very respectable showing. I think there's a lot of intensity and a lot of emotion in this matchup, so I think that spread is a stay away. I think if you're a Villanova fan, you sit back and you enjoy the W. You don't worry about the spread. And similarly, over-under is 151.5. I think that's a stay away. Nova's hit all overs except for one push and then not hitting in the Georgetown game. Otherwise, they've been all over so far. Could be a good one tonight, but I think both of those are stay away. And I think that's about it for my time here. So thank you so much for watching. Ladies and gentlemen, it's about that time. Turn on your TVs to Fox Sports 1 because it's tip time. We'll see you on Wednesday for the Marquette game.